Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the AI Marketing Stacks podcast. And today I'm here with Richard Matthews, who is the founder of Push Button Podcasts. And he's going to share a lot of interesting things about how he's using AI to speed up all of his different processes, optimize them, not and also blend it with the human element. And just based on our conversation and what I know about him is he's someone who does this at a very high level and a very meticulous level. And he's been generous enough to share. He'll talk about the tools, the processes that he's been using, and also the great reveal, which is as professional as his setup looks and feels right now. He's actually in the back of a 40-foot RV because he's a true digital nomad who has not only grown an incredible digital marketing company, but has done it while on the road with his family, which is something I think very, very few people have done or would even aspire to do. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here. And here we'll break the illusion. This is actually like RV bedroom and closet, and there's a bed behind me, and all it goes to show you is you just need. We talk about this all the time at Push Button Podcast. You need four things: lights, camera, microphone, backdrop. And so I've got two lights, I've got a lapel mic,
Love
and
it.
my iPhone is running the video, and there is just a backdrop that I have hung from my ceiling up here. It's on a little clicker that rolls back up or rolls down, and
That's
you
amazing.
got a professional looking studio in the back bedroom of an RV.
It's great. It's I got a lot to learn. So I got one out of four, but we'll
Yeah,
get it.
well, if any of your audience or staff or anything wants to look up how to do this, we have a how-to guide on our website. It's pushbuttonpodcast.com/studio, walks through those four things and how to set them up.
Love it. So the first question I want to ask you is why podcasts?
So podcasts for me are this is a long answer. So let me break it for you. The first part is that the word podcast over the last 10 years has grown to include a lot more than what it used to. So you go back 10 years ago, podcast was like an episodic audio thing on Apple iTunes,
Hmm.
right? And the term has grown to sort of include any sort of serialized or episodic content, whether that's video, audio, written content. People refer to them as that's my podcast. It's like the serialized content that you're putting out into the marketplace. So it's become a big umbrella term. So that's one reason, is that it sort of encompasses content marketing nowadays. And a lot of big names refer to their show as their podcast. So like Daily Wire calls their show a podcast, or Joe Rogan calls his show a podcast. And so it's become the cultural term for serialized or episodic content that is not done by traditional media. So non-traditional serialized episodic content is podcasting. That's the first part. The second part for it is it it is a really highly leveraged form of content marketing. One, because it is incredibly repurposable. So it's really very much time leveraged. So all of our clients, for instance, we average 2 to 3 hours of content recording per month. And a lot of times they'll batch record that. So like one day, sit down, record 4 or 5 episodes, or record 4 or 5 interviews. And that's all the content they're going to need for the month, because that one video episode can turn into a YouTube video. It can turn into an audio podcast that's distributed all across the podcast networks. You can cut out short clips from it for your TikTok, Instagram, Facebook Reels. You can pull out quotes for LinkedIn and for Instagram and for Twitter. I guess it's called X now, right? You can just pull all of your content from that one recording session that you need. And we even use AI tools to take the transcripts of the episodes and transform the audio that was spoken to it into written content as well, because you can by keeping and also keeping the author's voice, which is hard to do if you don't have something like an AI tool to do that. And so it's really highly leveraged from that standpoint, is that you can just get all of your content from a couple of hours of work once a month. And then the other couple of things that go along with it, and why we use podcasts rather than, say, a newsletter or a blog, which are both really useful things to be cornerstones of your content marketing. We like the podcast better because a regularly published podcast, as the host of one, you have the best access leverage in the world. And what I mean by access leverage is you can pretty much approach anyone with a regularly recorded podcast and say, hey, I'd like to have you come on my show. And it's really difficult for someone like myself or other successful businesses to say no to the I would like to come and talk on your business for free, get free attention to my business, free attention to our stuff, and to tell my story. That's a hard thing to say no to.
Hmm.
And so like my podcast, we're at like 250 episodes for our own podcast. I've had venture capital backed firms that had billions of dollars in funding. We've had, I had a QVC seller that was selling $500 million a year in jewelry. I had the CEO of AWeber asked to come on our show, and they're basically like invented email marketing 25 years ago. And everything in between. We had coffee shop owners in the Philippines. Anyone that I want to build a relationship with, I can because of my podcast. And so we tell our clients it's high value prospecting and high value referral partnerships or strategic partnerships. You can build relationships with people very quickly because of what podcasting is. It's a storytelling platform where we're going to get on and I'm going to share some of my stories with you. You're going to share some of your stories with me. And over the course of 45 minutes, we've gotten to know each other a lot more than almost any other form of networking and relationship building. That's the second reason. And there's one more. And the third reason is what we call a buyer's journey leverage. The buyer's journey leverage is this idea that every decision that your customers are going to make follows the Eugene Schwartz buyer's journey, which is unaware, problem aware, solution aware, product aware, most aware is ready to buy, right? And that buyer's journey, the longer it is or the more complex that is, the more content marketing helps impact the know, like, trust part of the equation. And so if you start creating content that is helping people become aware of their problem, you start creating content that's helping people understand why they have the problem for the things, you help people understand how you can solve them, and you can create content, like case studies and testimonials with your customers that help show them what am I looking for? The customer experience looks like for someone who's been through what you do. You're able to create content that hits all stages of the buyer's journey, which for most businesses, they're used to just doing direct response marketing. And that is ads that go to someone who is in the ready to buy stage or maybe just before that. And then your direct response ads are sitting up right next to everyone else who is doing the same thing. And so the one with the best copy and the best landing page and the best offer always wins. And so
And the
what we're
biggest
looking
budget.
to do, yeah, and the biggest budget, what
Yeah.
we're looking to do is how do we start building the relationship earlier in the buyer's journey where most people are not talking to their audience, but the overwhelming majority of people exist. They exist in those first three stages of unaware, problem aware, solution aware, that kind of thing. That's where most people are, and the fewest people are being talked to by their eventual people they'll buy from. And so if you start creating content and showing up in front of the marketplace back here, by the time they get to your direct response ads, now they're seeing, person A, person B, person C's direct response ads and yours. And they know you. They've seen you every day in your feed for 2 years because they've been thinking about this stuff forever. And now when they're ready to buy, they're ready to click on an ad. The ads they're going to click on are going to be yours. And so that's
Hmm.
buyer's journey leverage. And so, why podcasting? I know it's a long answer, but that's the long answer of why podcasting.
No, that's a brilliant answer, and it's comprehensive and really clear. What So with that in mind, and I want to talk about storytelling. We'll get to the AI tools and systems because I'm really excited about that too. But I do want to talk about the storytelling. And before that, I want to ask, like, what makes a good podcast?
It's a difficult question because it's different for everyone and it's different for the industries that you're in. But a good podcast is going to follow what I learned from Tony Robbins, the 3 E's: educational, entertaining, empowering. Right. And so if you can hit the 3 E's, you can educate someone, you can entertain someone, and you can empower them, you're going to have a good podcast. Right.
Hmm.
And one of the questions we get asked all the time is how long should a good podcast be? It's the wrong question because there's no such thing as too long, only too boring. And you can see that. You watch Tim Ferriss's podcast; he's got 4 hour long podcasts, or new Netflix specials 10 hours long, and some people will binge watch it. So there's no such thing as too long, only too boring. And so what you're looking at is how can you have engaging conversations or engaging structure to what it is that you're doing. Like my podcast is an hour long, and it's always an hour long, right around that. And it's a unique storytelling thing that we're doing. So it's called the Hero Show, and we talk to founders of different businesses and we tell their stories as if they were a comic book superhero. So we go through like their origin story and their superpower and their fatal flaw and their common enemy. And so it's a new way to sort of approach telling someone's story. And so we get a lot of engagement from that. And so what you're looking for is how do you build into the content that you're creating those three things? How can it be educational? How can it be entertaining? And how can you empower someone so when they listen to what you're doing, they're actually getting benefits from it?
Hmm. And based on some things that I've seen about you is like you put a big emphasis on storytelling, right? With your Hero's Journey podcast, but I would assume in general, storytelling is like a really powerful tool that you use.
Yeah.
What makes, how can people tell better stories in their marketing?
So storytelling is a baseline human characteristic. It is one of the things that defines us as a species. And it's also one of the things that I think makes us a super dominant species on the planet. And, if we ever become, multiplanetary, it'll be one of the things that makes us a dominant species galactically too, right? That's like super sci-fi stuff. But storytelling is a key aspect of who we are and what makes us a strong species. So I always tell people human beings are a storyborn people. And what that means is we judge the depth of our relationships based on the amount of someone else's story that you know. And so what that means is like if you have someone that you know their name, but you don't know their story, then you call that person an acquaintance. If you know their name and you know some of their story, you might call them a friend. If you know their name and you know all of their story, or in fact, you know so much of their story that the only way that you guys get to know each other better is to either go out and have new experiences and share them or go out and, have new experiences together, we call those people our best friends.
Mm.
Right? And so we judge the depth of our relationships based on how much someone else's story that you know. And so when it comes to your marketing or your storytelling or your networking, a lot of what you're doing is you're looking for ways to share your story and to get your customers or to get the other person to share their stories back with you, to exchange stories with one another. So what's really fascinating about podcasting in general, or almost any sort of content marketing, is it gives you a platform to share your story. And so what that is it's like everything that goes into your business, whether that's your lifestyle or the struggles that you're going through to learn to grow a business, uh, or your successes, your failures, any of the things that happen in your storytelling, you can share those things, and your audience, that's how like fame happens. Your audience has experienced more of your story
Mm.
than you have of theirs, and so they feel like they know you even though you may not know them.
Mm.
And so like one of the things that I have started doing a lot in my business, and I know we coach a lot of our clients to do the same kind of thing, is look at your life and look at your business and look at everything that's going on as opportunities to share stories with your audience. So just as an example from my life, I mentioned we travel full time. So I talk about my life in traveling full time with 4 kids and 2 ferrets and a 40-foot RV while growing a large company with a bunch of staff. That's the story that I live. That's where I pull a lot of my experiences from. That's where I pull a lot of my the things that I share, and like the metaphors and everything that I use when I'm talking to things comes from the stories that I live. And my podcast, those are stories that we share, right? We get other people onto our podcast and we share their stories. And so we're looking at how do I extract someone's story and share it with our audience. And then Push Button Podcasts, our agency, those are the stories that we help amplify, right? And so we're helping clients tell their stories and amplify them out everywhere they're going. And so our whole business is built around this concept of storytelling and just getting better at it and learning how to be masters of what I think is probably one of the highest leverage skills you can have, which is knowing how to tell a good story.
Mm. How, what are some, I know it's a lifelong process and a lifelong journey to master, but like high level, how can people tell better stories? What are some of the biggest things you see?
I'll give you my 2 secret hacks. Number
Mm.
1, watch comedians. And instead of watching comedians, sitting with a nice adult beverage and some snacks, sit there with a notepad instead.
Mm.
My wife thinks I'm nuts, but we'll regularly sit down and watch, comedy specials, dry bar comedy or Netflix specials or whatever. There's lots of places where you can watch them. Watch comedians and take notes of things like how are they transitioning? How are they embedding one story into another story? How are they what points are they telling and not telling? And because you'll see the level of detail that they get into in some stories or the level of details that they skim over. So you'll see what's important and what's not,
Mm.
because comedians are professional storytellers. They're some of the best on the planet. So I always take the opportunity a couple of times a week to sit down and watch stand-up comedians.
Any
Um,
favorite comedians?
I like there are a couple new ones. Matt Rife, it's really good.
Yes.
And I'm gonna forget his name, Dustin Stout or something like that. He's the guy that's got the little bit of the stutter from the brain injury he had. He's hilarious, and I love watching him. But they do a really good job of telling their stories. But any comedian who's made it big enough that you can find their name, you see them popping up in your YouTube feeds, find their full specials and
Mm.
sit down and watch them as an educational experience. So that's
Mm.
hack number 1. Hack number 2 is practice your stories all the time. So a couple of things that I do is I have a bank of stories that are like life experiences or things that I've experienced or things that I've gone through or struggles that I've had, or just fun things that I do with my kids, right? So like my son spins fire all the time, and I have lots of stories from him spinning fire. And anytime you have the opportunity to be in a group of people, so any networking events you go to, if you're not going to network events, find some, go to them regularly. If you have, we travel in RV parks and they regularly have like potlucks, which means you're meeting a bunch of new people. Find opportunities to meet new people, especially useful if you're never going to see those people again. And then tell the same story over and over again to 15, 20 different people and change how you tell it, right? How much detail do you include? Which parts, change your emphasis, change the things, because the way that you get better at storytelling is practicing.
Hmm.
And so, learn from masters and then practice your stories. And the better you get at telling the stories, the more you'll see, like, you can see the reactions that you get from people, and you can start shifting things live, especially if you tell the same story to 15 people in one night during a potluck or networking event. Um,
What I
and you
what I
can
love about that,
refine them.
I, what I love about that is that because that's essentially what comedians do to get so good at storytelling, right? Like so many of them, they'll go and they'll rehearse and they'll workshop their material in front of a live audience over and over and over again, just like you said, to do with networking events or wherever. Like they'll add more detail or subtract detail and figure out the almost like a little intricate like timepiece, right? They'll figure out all the mechanics of the story. So I love that. And I also love comedy. So
So
good
if
advice.
you back our conversation up a few minutes, the three forms of leverage that we talked about a minute ago, it was the access leverage and the buyer's journey leverage and the time leverage. That came together because I did 40 different podcast interviews and spoke on stage 4 different times and went to 15 or 20 different networking events and told the same story about what it is that makes a podcast powerful hundreds of times,
Hmm.
until I could get it down to like, okay, these are the things that actually make a difference for what we're providing and what makes sense and connects with people so they understand what it is. It didn't start that way. That's it's a development of a story that has happened over a lot of iterations. And so you
Hmm.
practice to get good at storytelling.
What are and again we'll get to AI and the marketing, but as a burgeoning podcast host, I'm I'm selfishly asking these questions because I'm learning a ton. But what are the biggest mistakes or the most common mistakes that you see people make when they have a podcast or are struggling to grow a podcast or make the podcast better?
So that's one I don't have pre-rehearsed stories for. So I'll
Mhm.
just give you like live off the top of my head. The biggest struggles that I see people have is they don't know how to give good interview.
Mm,
Right. And so giving good interview is how you have a structured conversation that you're in control of, that is going to push forward well and help you get those, educational, entertaining, and empowering. And so you're doing a pretty good job of it. But it's the kind of thing that takes practice. And so how you give good interview is two things: ignorant and curious.
mm,
Even if you know as much as as much or more than the person you have on as a guest, pretend you're ignorant. You don't know anything about them, about their experience, about their perspective, about their stories that they have. So you're ignorant and you're really curious to know, how does their life experience impact what they see. Even if something that you're already an expert at, you can come at it from that perspective, because that's the way that your audience is going to come at the conversation. They're going to be, I like to imagine that you and the person that you're interviewing are sitting around a fire with a couple of drinks and the stars are shining there and you're just chatting, and then everyone else who's your audience is sitting around the fire just listening to you guys talk, right? You want to have a conversation with that sort of like mentality in place, where you are ignorant about who they are and what their stories are, and you're curious to know as much as you can. So you want to extract their stories. That's the first part. The
mm,
second part is that it's never about just the questions that you ask and the stories that you're extracting from the other person, but it's how do you turn it into a mutual exchange of stories? Because what's going to make a really interesting conversation and what's going to make a really interesting podcast, and again, this can be the kind of thing that, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a external guest. It could be someone who else is on your team. It could be someone that you have like a recording buddy that you're doing these things with. So even if you just want to keep the podcast, strictly about the stuff that you guys do, you could do that. They don't have to be all guest podcasts. But the structured conversation is really useful. So the second part is, you want to have that exchange of stories. And so the exchange of stories are, I share something like, hey, I live in an RV and we do this thing, blah, 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 blah. And you hear that and you're looking through your bank of stories to find something that connects. You're like, oh,
mm.
I've had that experience before, or something similar to it. Let me share that experience with you and see how it connects the ideas together. right? And it gives you the opportunity to share your stories, so your audience hears that as well. And when you take their story and you connect it with your story, it helps it helps turn that one shared story into something that builds connection between you both, and helps your audience understand both stories better because you've exchanged the stories back and forth. So that's the second thing for making a good podcast, good interesting podcast that is going to help with growth and everything. Because if it's not interesting, people aren't going to watch it, and it's not going to grow. So you have to have like the foundational stuff better. And then the last sort of part of that is you want to have some sort of a structure to your show. And so if you look at serialized fiction, for instance, so that's any of your like regular shows that come out, they always follow a similar like story arc. And it's like, if you ever watch those murder mysteries, it's like, here's a character and then they die and then someone discovers them and then they, the people come into the crime scene and they look at it and they get up with the first guy that they think it is. It's never that guy. It's always someone else. Right. And like they all follow the same story arc because the story arc works. So what you're looking for is when you're having a conversation with someone, you want to have a structure to your conversation. And so the structure of your conversation is, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And you can, there's lots of different things that you can look up to find structured conversations. My favorite that I use almost all the time is something that I call the WIN formula, which is what, why, how, now. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about podcasting and AI. And so you can go through and define all of your terms. What is podcasting? What is AI? You can really dive into that. That's sort of what we're doing. And you talk a little bit about why. Why is podcasting? You started there, right? You went into why podcasting. And then you get into how. So how can you make podcasting better? How can you do this in this way? How can you use AI to help do that? So you're following this sort of structure already. For those people who've never done this before, that sort of what are we talking about? Define your terms. Why is it important? That helps you define your enemies. It helps you really like get people to understand why we're talking about this thing and get emotionally invested into it. How, and all the questions that go along with the how. And then the last one is now. And so now is your perspective. And that's going to be stories, case studies, examples that you might sprinkle through your content to get your perspective or your guest's perspective on those different things. And so you have structured conversation that hits those kind of highlight points. And that's going to help you make sure that no matter what someone's familiarity with whatever your topic is in your audience, you're hitting the 4 levels of awareness for someone's understanding. That comes out of instructional design stuff, but it's always what, why, how, now. And so if you're trying to build a structure for your conversation, that's a structure that you can have. So those are my 3 suggestions.
I love it. It's pretty good for for not being rehearsed. It's pretty streamlined. What last question specifically for the podcast is, how do you think about asking good questions?
So asking good questions is it's generally about how do you ask questions that are either going to elicit a good story or are going to come across as a new and surprising sort of thing for your guest. Because if it's new and surprising for your guest, it's going to be new and surprising and interesting for your audience as well. And so as an example, the frame that I have for my podcast is the hero show, right? Is we're going to talk through your stories that you've told all the time anyways, just with a different frame. And so your framing is one way that you can do that, right? And so the framing for us is, you're a superhero. And so as the superhero, entrepreneurs are superheroes. What's your origin story, right? Were you bit by a radioactive spider? Or were you born with these superpowers, right? And so now it's a story they've told before, but they're telling it into a new frame. And so you're using them as story prompts with an interesting frame. So that's one way. One of the other ways that you can think about asking good questions is right in that ignorant and curious phase that we talked about earlier. Is like, if you were completely ignorant about the subject, what would you want to know, right? To become a master at it. And so just assume the other person is a master and that you are their protege. And what are the questions that you would ask if you were sitting under their tutelage? And so when you approach those, and again, the hardest part about that is when you are already a master yourself, is thinking back to what does it look like if I'm not, if I'm a complete beginner, how do I ask these questions? And then once you ask them, you're listening for their stories and you're prompting them for their stories and you're looking for ways, how can I share my stories back and forth with them to turn that into a good conversation.
Awesome. I love that. I want to shift a little bit and talk about the AI tools that you use, because I know you have a very sophisticated, not just in terms of the tools, but also in terms of the workflow and the processes that you have. But let's just start with the tools. What are the 2 or 3 most like common tools that you use in your workflow, or the tools that like have the biggest impact for what you guys do?
Yeah, so I'm gonna back it up just a couple of seconds because I want to make sure people understand this. We use in the marketplace this term AI a lot, and AI stands for artificial intelligence, which I think if they're watching your show, they probably know that. The problem is artificial intelligence doesn't exist yet. What we have now, the generative language models that are really fancy, they're all forms of machine learning. And so machine learning is just computers doing work that humans used to do. If you go back 5 years, it was automations. Automations were the same kind of thing. Now automations were doing things that computers used to do or that humans used to do. And so we're just at the next sort of stage of building really good machines. But the machines aren't intelligent yet. They might eventually get there, but they're not. I don't know what the timeline looks like that. I'm not even going to pontificate on it, but I can tell you from using all of them, they are not human beings. They do not have the human beings' powers, but they do have a very specific set of skills that we don't have. And it's the kind of things that almost all of our computers have had as we've built up our tools is they're really good at data, they're really good at structure, they're really good at not messing things up and doing the same thing over and over and over again. They're not good at learning, they're not good at creativity, they're not good at understanding culture, they're not good at understanding context. And so those are all things that are really good human traits. So what we look at, and when we're looking at using any of these tools, we're looking at how can we take the powers that are uniquely human, right? That creativity, that learning, that cultural understanding, the ability to tell and understand stories, and mix it together with what machines are really good at. So if you are really interested in looking this up, look up the term irreducibly complex computation for the nerds in your audience. Computers are really good at irreducibly complex computation, and human beings are not good at that. We have to reduce everything into words so that we can hold large concepts into small packages. That's what language is. And computers can actually hold like all the world's data at one time and then process all of that. So how do you look at marrying those two together? And so when we're looking at AI tools, in that I'll also include our automations, the big ones for us are going to be anything on the simpler side, things that allow us to move processes along without human involvement or to automate things. And so my rule of thumb is if a computer can do it, then I don't need to have a human being do it. And if a human being can do it better than a computer, we have a human being do it. So the idea is I don't want any of my staff members to be doing things that computers can do. I want them to do what only they can do, right? And so, like a CEO of the company, one of the things that only I can do is only I can be my face, right? Only I can share my stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at how do I get all those kind of things out? And when we come into each of my staff members, I'm looking at what are the things that are uniquely human about them and about their skill sets and about their capabilities, and then take everything else off of their plate and give it to robots. So some practical examples of that. We spend an inordinate amount of time doing things like when our clients finish recording an episode, I want the act of them clicking stop record to do all of the work that would be necessary to get it into our project management system and to move the files and all of that. So that means we use tools like Zapier, we use tools like ClickUp for project management, we use some other things that and we use specifically a recording studio. We use Squadcast, by the way, for that. That when one of our clients clicks stop record, that action, because they're done, they hit stop record, that's where the push button comes from, that Zapier is notified that there's a new recording. And Zapier takes that notification and takes the recording files and they creates a task in ClickUp and it assigns it to the right person in ClickUp and it adds the right documentation in ClickUp. Those are all things that a human being could do, but a robot's going to do a much better job of. And then it means that my staff is not doing things that are easily automatable. And I say easily, but some of those are pretty complex. But we're building the effort into automating processes that so my staff is only doing things that they're really good at. So that's one example. So we use Zapier, we use ClickUp, and we use all the automations in ClickUp to add like templates. We've got every step of our process templated. We use documentation inside of ClickUp to automatically apply the documents into the checklists for our staff, so they know what they're getting into. And it'll also like reflow due dates and all sorts of other things. Those are all automations that are built inside of ClickUp with their templating structure in their system.
I'm sorry, when you say documents, you mean
SOPs.
SOPs. Okay.
Yeah, our SOPs. So standard operating procedures for those who are less familiar with the terms. but your standard operating procedures for how to do a thing, right? So so there's a lot of process automation that's happening. And those ones are, I consider that last gen AI. That's what everyone was worried about, 5 years ago. And now it's, machine learning AI.
Mm.
So on the current gen stuff, we use a couple of tools. So we use Descript. Descript is really potent for a couple of things. It has several machine learning models built inside of it, which is why it's such a cool tool nowadays. So Descript allows us to use the Whisper AI protocol from OpenAI to do transcriptions of audio. And so we put in a video from like a podcast like this, and it'll automatically transcribe the video, which is super cool. But it does it in a unique way where it actually ties every single frame of the video to the transcript in a document. So I can have someone who is not a video editor edit the video. Because they can edit it like they're editing a text document. They can go to the text document and say, hey, I want to take this sentence, and I highlight the sentence, and you click delete, and it does what's called a jump cut in the video editing in the text document. And so they're doing complex video edits by editing a text document, which is a really nifty feature. And that's all powered by AI tools. It's powered by machine learning, but it's the kind of thing that it doesn't call itself AI like say GPT does, so people don't see it that way. But it's the same machine learning algorithms that are building them, which is why I wanted to make the distinction earlier. And it has a couple of other tools that are all really useful that are built into it. So it has a machine learning algorithm for detecting ums and ahs and other things. So you can just say like, hey, go through the transcript, find all the ums and ahs, and remove them. And I want to remove them all and you can have like delete or gap clip or a couple other things, which are just their terms for, jump cuts. And so you click a button and it'll jump cut all the ums and ahs right out of the video. And it uses AI to do that. We can do the same thing with, they have something called Studio Sound. And Studio Sound is essentially, it's an AI application of what my team used to do by hand, which is, doing the compressors and the limiters and the auto ducking and the background noise cancellation, which were all things with sliders and whatnot that you have to, process through the audio. And now they click a button and it takes 5 minutes for the AI to analyze the whole audio. And then it's just, boom, done. That's a machine learning algorithm that's doing that. One of their newest AI tools is one they call eye contact, which is if I'm looking at you down here because you're down here, but my camera is actually up here. It's a little bit higher up there. You can push a button now and it'll actually uses AI face recognition stuff, and it'll adjust your gaze so that it's looking at the camera. That one's still in beta, but those are all machine learning algorithms, right? They're all essentially the same type of AI that ChatGPT is, just applied to eyeballs or sound or ums and ahs instead of applied to language generation. So that's a pretty comprehensive tool that we use. One of the other things that it'll do is a template application. So in the realm of doing what only you can do, we have split up our video editing into 2 roles. So the creative video editing, we have a high dollar, really talented video editor will come through and create all of the templates for a client. And so we'll create templates for the host speaking and the guest is a small one. We'll create a template for the guest speaking and the host is being small. And we'll create templates with the lower thirds, and we'll create templates where they're both on screen or only one's on screen, or there's 3 people on screen. And we'll create all these really good looking templates that are branded for the customers. And it has all the video elements. They'll have like 10, 15, 20, 30 different video layers that used to be, I had to hire that high dollar video editor to edit the entire transcript and edit the entire video. But now I hire them to create the templates for us. And then I can have someone who is good at the document portion where they can just highlight this section and be like, I want this section to use this template. You click the template and it does all the video editing for them. And so now I have someone who is not in the same price point and skill level as a video editor to be able to edit all the videos together. So we can achieve that thing that we talked about before we started hitting record, which is, how can I give better output to my clients at cheaper at so better, cheaper, faster. How can we get the better, cheaper, faster and get all 3 of them with AI tools? And so that's one of the ways that we do that is we are splitting out the roles into, hey, this is something that only you can do, and then robots can do this other part. So let's just let robots do it. And in that case, it's just application of the templates that have already been created instead of having to recreate them on every scene. So that's a really potent one.
And real quick, when you talk about templates, these are templates for
the video
like a YouTube videos? Are these for shorts? Are these for pretty much any, for all of it? And are you you're creating branded templates with different forms. So like some are side
Yeah.
by side and some are
Yeah. Some are
guest
side by,
figure.
and some of them are going to be like the widescreen one that's going to go for YouTube. Some of them are going to be the square ones that are really useful for Instagram. Some of them are going to be the tall ones for, the YouTube Shorts and TikTok. And we'll create an entire suite of branded templates that have your captions and your lower thirds and your multiple guests or single guests all the way through for the whole client. And then we pay the really good video editors to do all of that and create all the branding and create all the things for them. And then we can have someone else come through and actually just use the application of those templates to intelligently look at this scene works with this template, go. This scene works with this template, go.
Mm,
And they don't have to know how to do all the video editing, because the video editing has been done and prepackaged, and the AI is smart enough to know this section requires this template. It'll apply all the things correctly.
mm,
And occasionally it gets some things wrong, so you might have to go and be like, hey, I want this layer actually needs to be this person's voice and not the other person's voice, or this layer needs to have this person's name on it and not this person's name. That's where the human beings can come in and clean it up. But now we've got a better product that we can deliver faster, that we can deliver cheaper than anyone else because of the AI tools.
mm.
Um, and that's just one tool. That's the Descript tool, and we're pushing that tool to its limits on a regular basis. We spend a metric crap ton of money on that tool every month,
Mm.
for our team to do that. But that's one. So one of the other tools we use is Magi. And I like, they're a really cool company. I know Dustin's the CEO over there. Can get you an introduction if you want to talk to them at some point.
We love it.
Uh, but he uses a lot of the generative AI tools. So your generative text and your generative image stuff, and he's tapped into all their APIs. And what it allows us to do is we can use Claude, which has their 100K context. We can use ChatGPT 4 and their 32K context. We can use ChatGPT 3.5 and their 8K context. And we can use Midjourney for their image generation. And we can use the other one that I can't remember the name of for their image generation, Dolly 3, I think, all inside of this system. And he's set it up so that you can have folders, and you can have saved prompts and other things that you use regularly.
Mm,
So we have folders set up for all of our clients, and we build custom prompts for the type of stuff that we're working with. And so we save all that stuff, and it allows us to have a lot of efficiency on the written side. And so we do a couple of things that I think, just for your audience, it would be really useful to know. We talked about things that human beings are good at and things that robots are good at. Human beings are good at context and creativity and language and sort of understanding that thing. Robots are really good at structure. So if you can take the transcript of, say, like this podcast episode, we can take the entire transcript of this podcast, and I can drop it into the AI and say, hey, I want to get a blog post that is about the topics we talked about, or like, give me what the topics we might be able to do, and break them out for us. And then we pick a subject from it, and have a template that you feed it a whole 2,500 word template of like, I want you to follow this template in this order. And I want you to take this transcript, and I want you to write using their voice, right?
mm,
Using the kind of language that they use and the kind of the kind of like texture and feeling that they have in their stuff. You can put all those into the prompts, and you can get a written piece that sounds like I wrote it,
mm,
because it's using my language and my words and my sentence structures. But it's well written instead of being well spoken, right? Because
mm.
spoken language is very different than written language. So if you can use that same language, it sounds like you wrote it. So we do that in a lot of different ways, where we will do summaries, and we do blog posts, and then we'll take like when we do shorts, like the 30-second or 60-second shorts, we'll take the transcript of those, and we'll be like, hey, take this transcript of this short and give me a caption, right? A 100-character or 200-character caption written in the language from the transcript, and then give me 4 variations of that. And
Mm.
so, like, 4 variations of the caption. And then, so now we're using AI to create several different written options for what we're doing. And we can do, again, all of that very, very quickly. So, and I mentioned before, we have this kind of stuff tracked. Before the generative AI, we were still doing this stuff. We were just had a human being doing all of it. An episode would take us about 4 to 5 hours to process for one writer to listen to the whole thing, to read through the transcript, and then to write the summary, and then to write the blog posts, and to write all the social media captions. Now, and because of that, because it took 4 or 5 hours, we had to hire someone, generally internationally, so we could make the pricing make sense. And now we hire U.S. Staff members, where we're working on hiring more U.S. staff members, and we can pay higher dollar amounts, and we can offer more work to our staff, which is all cool, and it takes us less time, and we get better quality, more consistent output. So we've broken the iron triangle again, where we're offering better, cheaper, and faster because of the cool application of AI tools. And so that's a third one, or a second one. And then a third one that we use that's really useful is we use a tool called Cloud Campaign. And Cloud Campaign is a social media management platform. There's a lot of these out there. They almost all do this. So it doesn't really matter that it's Cloud Campaign. It's just a thing to think about. So in the written section, we were creating multiple variations of captions. And so when we put posts into our content library for our clients, we'll put 4 or 5 different variations of the captions in there. And because short content is short-lived, we can tell we want to recycle that content, and anything that does well the first time that it gets posted will get automatically, based on their little AI algorithms, put into a schedule in the future, and it'll start reposting the short content into the future and it'll start shifting the captions that go around with it so it feels like original content.
Which tool was that?
That one's Cloud Campaign.
Cloud Campaign. Awesome.
Yeah. So that one's a cool little system as well. But again, most of the social media management platforms will do that. It's just thinking about how do you want to apply the tools and use them well. So like what we do at Push Button Podcast is we're creating original content every single day. So they're getting at least one short is posting on their platform every single day. But once you get a backlog of content, now you have all this content that was short-lived, that was good stuff. Anything that was good, we can have the AI tool start publishing, 2, 3, 4 times a day by pulling stuff from the past and republishing it. Because people see it again and start getting more views, start doing those kind of things. Especially true on YouTube Shorts and TikTok, that you can republish the same content, get another 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 views on them, because they're short-lived. So use AI tools to do that. So those are our 3 big ones. There's probably more, but those are a lot of big AI tools that we make use of in our systems.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for breaking that down so detailed.
Yeah.
That's incredible. When you think about like marketing in general and the way that you market, what's like the last surprising thing that you learned about marketing that changed how you approach it?
Surprising thing that changed how I approach marketing, that everybody's wrong. And that's including myself, right? So that's not like I'm right and everyone else is wrong. The reality is nobody really knows what we're doing. And we are all experimenting all the time. And a lot of times, even like one of the things that's been really interesting to me as I have gotten to move into big, upper echelon sort of a business, because, our business is growing rapidly and we're getting into the talking with more successful clients, with more successful businesses that are in the millions and multi-millions and multi-million businesses, that everyone who is running a company is, for lack of a better term, they're flying by the seat of their pants, right? And that's what makes entrepreneurs special, is because they have high risk tolerance and they're willing to try and experiment and see what's working and move forward with that. And so what's interesting in the marketing space is, in the marketing space, you hear a lot of people tell you this is the way to do something, or this has worked for me. And while that may be true, the reality is a lot of people don't actually know why one thing works or another thing works. So you hear lots of things like email marketing is dead, or direct mail is dead, or whatever. And the reality is none of this stuff is dead. It all works if you work it, and sometimes it works better for you or for another person. And if you can figure out how to take anything that you want to do in your marketing in your business, whether it's cold outreach or it's direct mail or it's social media or it's podcasting or whatever it is, find someone who has successfully done it, and then figure out how you can extract their processes and apply those into your business, and you can make them work in your business. Because if it works, it's for someone, it can work for your business. And so I know that I don't exactly know how to describe that, but that's one of the things that has been really fascinating to me, is because I thought for a long time I didn't know how to do cold outreach until, and you hear people like, oh, cold outreach is terrible, it's bad for your business, and it makes you look bad in the marketplace. But I hired an organization that does hundreds of millions of dollars a year of cold outreach, and had them teach my team how to build that into our system. And we're starting to, we've only did that like 6 weeks ago, but we're already we've 4x the number of sales calls that we're doing in something that is that I thought wasn't a good fit. But the reality is you just need to find the people who know how to do that. And a lot of people will confidently tell you things don't work, or things, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And the reality is if it has worked for someone in the past, it could probably work for you if you can figure out how to build the systems around it and find someone who's successful to help you build it into your company.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Everybody's wrong.
Everybody's wrong. Everybody's wrong. So don't believe them.
Yeah. I yeah, I actually I like that. I like that
Yeah.
quite a bit because there's so many nuances, right? And so many to
Yeah.
every business and every market.
And what you'll find is like someone who is like we'll hire a team that does like the cold outreach really, really well. And they'll tell you that like, hey, cold outreach is great, but like direct response never worked for us. They're not masters there.
Yeah.
So they're wrong. Find someone who's a master at at direct mail and help them install the things, right? And that's where it's like everybody's wrong about something. And there's plenty of things that I'm wrong about in my company. And what the thing that has changed the most for me is just being able to admit that not only am I wrong, but probably everyone else is wrong about something too. And so, you know, like where I'm not a great copywriter or something like that, being able to talk to you guys and bring in, people who are masters at copy and what we should be doing with copy is going to get a lot better results than if I try to do it myself or some of those other things. And so, just accept that everybody's wrong about something and find the people who are right about it and have them help you build the right processes and systems.
The interesting thing about our space, I believe, or the internet marketing space or digital marketing space, like the way it evolved is you have a lot of really good technicians and you have a lot of really good showmen. And the showmen, by nature of being showmen, are the ones who often have the biggest platforms and the loudest voices and the most publicity. But then the technicians who understand how the things work and the nuances, a lot of times are different personality. And
Yeah.
I think things are coming to like more of an equilibrium when I look at like the digital marketing space and internet marketing space. But I think it's a really good rule of thumb that someone's degree of certainty, right, about one specific traffic source or one specific way to do something is an indication. It's usually like an indication that they may not be as much in the trenches or a technician as you think. Because typically when I, like, for example, you're probably one of the few, just from my conversations, you're probably one of the few people who can do both because you have a podcast and you are a showman and you know how to promote yourself. But I could also just tell by the way you break the processes down and the way that you talk is like you're also a technician. So you understand the nuances and the way things work, and you understand this might not work for everyone. This is just the way that we do things.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot. I think it's a really good reminder for a lot of people because I think you can get caught up, right, listening to all the advice and just getting stuck on that carousel of trying to do the new flashy, shiny thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have people like what's this guy, Alex Ramosi, in his big book that he
Oh
just
yeah.
released,
Who's that
right?
guy?
Yeah, only the most successful book launch in history, right? And he talks about, he's like, there's companies that are doing, the cold outreach for hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And I'm like, I mean, if somebody's doing it, I could do it. So,
Yep.
just add it into our realm of like what we're doing. And that's what I've started doing in my company is looking at where are the holes? Is it payroll? Is it systems and processes? Is it operations? Is it whatever? And like, I can't fix everything at once, but I'm taking like one thing at a time. And I'm like, okay, I need to find someone who is not going to tell me that that's wrong or that it's dead or that it's not going to work. I need to find the people who are masters in that area and be like, what does it take to have you teach me your mastery? And when I say teach me your mastery, what I mean is I want you to help me build systems that are self-managed in my company. And so if you can help me take the systems that are in your business and install them over here, that's really, really useful for me. Now when I hire agencies and hire other things, I'm generally looking at like, okay, I'm willing to pay you almost whatever it takes to make this system happen, but like the outcome needs to be, we have the system installed in our business, up to and including the documentation, the hiring processes, like what are all the things that make this work for you? And so if it works for you and you guys do it at a high level, it can work for us. We just have to figure out how to install those systems. But if you take that same question and go to another company who's not doing that, they'll tell you,
Can't be done. We tried it. It didn't work.
We tried that, didn't work.
I don't know if this is, it's interesting you mentioned that book with Alex Ramosi because he actually, I believe he talks about that exact process of the way that he hires agencies is instead of hiring the agency to do the service, he'll have a conversation and hire them to teach him, like whatever it costs, right? To share your time, teach me the process and the workflow so I can install it internally within my own company and make it work for myself. And so I think that's a really smart.
That was one of my favorite things in that book. I was like, oh, I do that. It's like, if he does it and he makes $100 million a year in his things, I'm on a good path.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's one of the gems in that book that I think a lot of people may skip over because it's kind of a deep cut. But I remember reading that and I was like, oh, that's super smart. That's genius. Okay, So this is actually really important question, which is what what makes somebody decide to grow their big digital marketing agency and do it in a 40-foot long RV with kids and a family.
So the name of my company is not the public name of it. You know how you have like the LLC name and then you
Mm,
have like you're doing business as. So our
yes.
DBA is Push Button Podcasts. But if you go and look at our LLC filings and like what we actually put on the IRS paperwork, it says Five Freedoms LLC.
Mm,
And five freedoms for me are you have your political freedom, and that is basically the freedom to to do what you want to do without your government stepping in and telling you you can't, right, within reason, right? We're not going to be murdering people for money. That's not in our umbrella of things, right? So like you have the political freedom to step up and do what you want to do. And so that's first freedom. Second freedom is time freedom, and that is the freedom to choose what you do with your time, and so your time is not dictated for you by someone else. Third one is location freedom, and so you get to choose where you want to spend your time, and so that's your time isn't your location isn't determined for you. When I worked in a job, right, you had like an 8-hour chain, right? I could get 8 hours away before I had to turn around and come back because I had to be at the desk the next day, and so location freedom. And then you have your one that everyone hears about all the time, which is financial freedom, and that is the freedom to not have your decisions limited by your bank account balance.
mm,
And then the last one I call is your health freedom, and that is to not have your decisions limited by what your body says you can or can't do.
mm,
Uh, and so when we get into things like why am I building a business, it is because I think um, a business allows me to build something that has all five of those freedoms built in, and up to and including the political freedom. And part of that is because one, we live in the United States, but as we build a company and you start impacting your community, you build the bigger value, you have the opportunity to have a bigger say in what is in the policies and the other things that are happening because you have the cash flow and you have the community resources and whatnot to actually have an impact on your community that way. So you have the ability to impact all five areas of those freedoms with a company. And so to that end, because we started our company a number of years ago, I started looking at the technology sort of all come to this place where we can travel, and the just everything is sort of like working together to the point where like we can actually run a company virtually nowadays. And so way back in 2017, before it was even cool to do so, we started looking at how can I run this company virtually,
mm.
and if we can run the company virtually, um, and it was easy back then because it was just me and maybe like one assistant every now and then I can have that time freedom and that location freedom to like travel. And we're still young, our kids are young, and we wanted to be able to do all of that while we were capable of doing it. And so we did, and we just went on the road and we started building the company virtually. And then COVID happened a few years in, and like everyone is like turning to ask me like, how are you managing remote work, and how are you managing remote school, and how are you managing this? Because we've been doing it for several years at that point.
Mm.
Uh, and we've just had years to sort of build those processes and just understand how to run a company, how to run a family, how to run school, how to run everything remotely. And it allows us to have just so many cool experiences and do all sorts of fun things. My youngest one is 4. She's been to 48 states.
Wow.
And my 14-year-old, he spins fire professionally. He just made $200 the other night spinning fire for a block party for Halloween.
Mm.
And he's written a 30-chapter novel with his friend, and they're animating a story for it that they've taught themselves how to animate, and they're training AI voices to voice act the entire book for them. And all of that is like without adult prompting. They're just doing those things. And a lot of the experiences, right? He's jumped off of waterfalls in Yosemite, and he stood on all four corners of the United States, and he swam on the Rio Grande, and he's been on the battlefield of Gettysburg. He's held cannonballs in Alamo, and like he's going through geology class in his school. And the week before, we were hiking the Narrows in the Zion that they were talking about in geology class.
Mm.
And so it the why is such a big wide thing for me, but it was to really experience this world that we live in, not just for ourselves, but for our children and for their education. And then for me, I want to just cram my life full of the kind of experiences that give me really good fodder for stories. And what's the most interesting thing that's happened, we talked about storytelling a lot during this podcast, is if I go back, 10 years from now, I was not the most interesting person in the room in almost any room I went into.
Mm.
But now, when I go to networking events, one of the things that I struggle with now is I'm the most interesting person in the room because of our life experiences. And when I go to networking events, I'm trying to learn other people's stories and extract things from them and like be able to build those relationships. And more often than not, people will hear what we do and how we live and what the business we're growing. And I'll end up with 10, 15, 20, 30 people circled around, all just wanting to hear my stories over and over again. And I'm like, that's not as helpful for me as it used to be when I was less interesting.
Mm.
uh, so there's like, that's one of the things I'm learning how to navigate now is how do you navigate being able to have that mutual story exchange with people when you've got the exciting life that everyone wishes they had.
Mm.
Um, and we're only continuing that going forward, right? We're done with the RV travels now. This next summer, we're working on buying a sailing yacht, a big 50-foot catamaran with 5 bedrooms and an office. And we're going to travel port to port around the world and grow our business from $1 million to $10 million a year in revenue. Um, and so we're working on doing things that everyone says you can't do, and everyone they tell you you can't teach on the road. Yes, you can. You can't run your business on the road. Yes, you can. You can't. Anytime someone tells you you can't, what I found is they're all wrong. Everyone's wrong about everything. And
Mm.
so anytime someone tells you you can't or you shouldn't or you whatever, what I have found is that you can really change. You can challenge that and see if it's true. And so we've been doing that in every category of our life. We've got a great relationship with my wife. I've got a great relationship with all 4 of my kids. And we do all of that living in a 40-foot RV and traveling the world. And, my team loves us. And you should see the testimonials stuff that we have. We have a great culture that we're building. All of my team members set their own schedules and they have really flexible they can choose how many hours they work and how much work they want. And, when we open up a new position, they scramble to tell their friends and family about coming to work for us. So
Mm.
you can build a great culture virtually if you try.
Mm.
And so, I guess that's a long answer to a big question, but yeah,
I love
it's,
that. I love that. And I really like that idea about almost like a mindset of I'm going to collect stories. How can I set up my life in a way that allows me to create stories, create new interactions and create things? Because not only does that make you the most interesting person in the room, which who doesn't want to be that, but also like how much richness and texture does that add to your life
yeah, the
to
texture and
experience
contrast of
that?
life. I tell people all the time is like people are like, oh, should I get in and travel the world in an RV? And I'm like, only if you really want that, because it's not, we get lots of highs, but we also get like great lows, right? It's the texture and contrast of life. But with the good comes the bad, being dead on the side of the road because something broke, right? We're got to leave tomorrow. And like I found one of our sides of our RV over here like fell off and I've got to go and fix that before we leave tomorrow.
Mm.
And so it's not all sunshine and roses, but that's part of the point. Right, the things that are the high lows allow you to have the really, you're basically increasing the amplitude of your life where most
Mm.
people are like living right here next to the middle, and our amplitude is really high, right? We've got things that like we've swam in the Rio Grande, and we've jumped off waterfalls, and we've had great. My son and I, one of his goals for traveling the country is we wanted to have enchiladas in all 48 states, and he's had enchiladas in all 48 states, so he's a veritable expert on enchiladas at this point. um, and if you are the kind of person who is you, your life in your business is always going to have some element of storytelling in it. And your business will be better and stronger and more profitable the better you get at telling stories. And when you have a life that is filled with great sex and great food and great experiences and great friends and great travels, like you have so much story to tell. And most people don't have that level of storytelling even available to them because they're not pushing their limits.
Mm.
And so what I tell myself and I tell my kids is that like your potential, like what you have this, but your perceived potential is like this box that you can see the edges of, but your actual potential is some other box that's outside of that. You can't see it, and you don't ever actually know what it is until you start pushing the limits.
Mm.
And so we push the limits everywhere in our lives. Everything from from our relationships to our food to our travels to what we're doing with our business. And you're like, hey, we ask questions like can I have a company that is as productive as a 40-hour work week company with a 30-hour work week standard? Answer to that question is yes, apparently, because
Mm.
we're doing that. We're outperforming higher hour companies because of the application of AI and stuff that we talked about earlier. And so we're paying full-time salaries on 30-hour work weeks and outproducing companies that have 40-hour work weeks because of what we're doing with AI stuff. And so we're looking at sort of every sort of area of our life and asking those kind of questions. How can I make this better? And, and the travel is just a part of that.
I love that. I love that. And I really only have one final question, which is the most important question, which is which state has the best enchiladas?
This is a surprising answer, but it is Yellowstone in, I believe it's Wyoming is where Yellowstone is.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a little taco truck there that a decorated chef from Mexico City comes in for 3 months every year in the summer, and he opens up his little taco truck. He's got a permanent little taco truck sitting there, and he makes some of the best goddamn enchiladas I've ever had in my life. And we found out, my son and I were traveling the country, and one of his goals was to try enchiladas everywhere. We ended up spending like $500 or $600 on enchiladas with him over the course of 3 or 4 days, and he made us every type of enchilada he knew how to make as a
Wow.
decorated chef from Mexico City. And my favorites were these ones called ranchero enchiladas, which are a dry enchilada that aren't usually served in the United States, and it looks kind of like a half quesadilla with like these spices all over the top of it and some interesting meats and stuff inside of it. But yeah, those were the best enchiladas we've had. And like I said, I spent probably $500 on enchiladas with this gentleman over the course of 3 or 4 days while we were in town.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And those are the kind of stories that you only get when you're traveling, right?
Yeah, I love that. Well, where can people find more about what you're up to, or Push Button Podcasts, or
Yeah, so of course, if you're interested in the podcasting, what we do with podcasts, we work with small businesses, online businesses to help them build, use a podcast as a content generation system, highly leveraged for you. We talked about all those forms of leverage. You can find all that stuff on pushbuttonpodcasts.com. There should be a demo button. If you click on that, it actually puts you on my calendar personally. I'm still going to be handling, I'm planning on handling sales for Push Button Podcast till we're well past $1 million, $2 million in revenue. So you probably still get to talk to me, which is cool. That won't last forever, but for now, you can still get on my calendar and chat with me. The other way that you can find me is at my website. I have a newsletter that's getting started called Permission to Play, that talks a lot about the philosophies that you hear me talk about today and how we've grown a company and grown our life the way that we have. And that's just at richardmatthews.me. And you can find all of my social media stuff there, and you can get on the newsletter channel there, and happy to chat with anyone who comes up.
Awesome. Well, Richard, thank you for being on the show and having the conversation with me, because this was my brain is stirring with all kinds of ideas, from the 5 freedoms to like storytelling and collecting stories, to your like the process that you have with podcasts, which I'm like, yeah, I got to go play around with Descript right now. So I really, really thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Awesome.